Hello and welcome to the Rogers Brief. I'm Adam Rogers. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. Now, it was a shorter day again with the Mass Casualty Commission here on day 7. There were less than 2 hours total worth of proceeding time today. So the video may be a little short too, but if you're looking for something a little longer, I did a podcast last night. Well, it starts on YouTube as a live YouTube feed and is saved as a video, but then made into a podcast with Jordan Bonaparte from Nighttime Podcast. And we get into a lot of the details summarizing the first 6 days and just some comments on the presentation and some of the evidence that's come forth so far. So if you're interested in sort of a deeper dive into things, that's a good place to go. For today was dedicated to continuing the process that had begun Thursday of the various participants getting up before the commissioners and making submissions as to why particular police officers should be called as witnesses. So that was completed today. There was some discussion still of sort of frontline officers, including a request for a 911 operator to be called. Joshua Bryson made that request. The 911 operator could hear, and we could hear, if you've heard the 911 tape, gunshots over the 911 call, and it's not clear whether those were conveyed to anyone else at that time. So we want the 911 operator in, and then also some of the supervisors, Staff Sergeants Halliday, MacCallum, Rehill, West, and O'Brien, to be called in their role as supervisors and what they knew and said and did, and as well Corporal Mills was named. Corporal Mills was the emergency response team, the ERT team commander. That's sort of the equivalent of a SWAT team for Canadian policing. So it was interesting. Chief Justice MacDonald said for the supervisors, it really wasn't a question as to whether they would be called to give testimony, but when that would take place. So that was sort of an interesting comment from the Chief Justice. With the other officers, the question is still very much open as to whether they will come and testify. And of course, the lawyers for the federal government and the National Federation of Police Federation, made submissions saying that none of these officers are required, that they've given statements already, and that those are thorough statements upon which the Commission can rely for the totality of their evidence. So we'll see, of course, how that unfolds. Another witness that was requested, and this was an interesting exchange, Tara Miller from MDW Law, who represents the family of Aaron Tuck and Kristen Beaton, asked for Sean Conlog to be called as a witness. Mr. Conlog, you may recall, was one of the two Maine residents of Maine, that were on these FaceTime calls with the perpetrator and Miss Banfield just hours prior to the rampage starting. About 4 hours prior to, there was a 24-minute long FaceTime call between Wortman, Banfield, and this Sean Conlog. And it sort of raises an issue as, okay, so there's statements provided. He spoke to the FBI and gave a statement, but as Ms. Miller relays, in that statement, there's really no discussion as to the content of that 24-minute call. And for something that happened, I mean, he was one of the last people to speak with Gabriel Wortman before he went off on this killing spree, and so certainly the content of the conversation would seem to be something worth exploring. But when you think, oh well, they've all given statements and they're thorough statements, well, in this case, Conlog was not asked about the content of that call, which seems peculiar. But anyway, so just something to be on the watch for. So another interesting thing that came up, Sandra McCullough from Patterson Law said, just in terms of dealing with the supervisor positions, that they shouldn't be treated the same as the frontline officers who would have experienced the traumatic events in a very direct fashion, as opposed to the supervisors who are either over the radio or over the phone or at a distance. And the federal government lawyer and the lawyer for the National Police Federation took great umbrage at that suggestion. They took offense, manufactured offense, one might say, watching the two of them, but they expressed offense in any event, that there would be any distinction attempted to be made between the trauma experienced by supervisors versus, frontline officers. And they even took offense with the terminology frontline, suggesting, of course, that anywhere in the situation, amid the situation, might be considered the front line for purposes of, identifying trauma. So we'll see how that gets treated by the commissioners, based on the way they refused to hear the expert witness, or the proposed expert witness, on a blanket exclusion of police witnesses last week. I kind of doubt that the commissioners are inclined to make any kind of sweeping statements about the trauma that may have been experienced by the officers. I think they'll look at that as on an individual basis. And like I say, Commissioner MacDonald noted that it would be a question of when, not whether, these supervisors would be testifying, which is another issue that Ms. MacCallum brought up, I thought very wisely as well, which was, well, if there's another foundational document coming. We've heard the foundational document about early sort of minutes and an hour in Portapic. We're going to hear about the overnight hours and so on. And there's also a command decision narrative foundational document coming up. RCMP Command Decision Narrative. And so the commissioners say, well, at that time, these staff sergeants and corporals will be testifying. But Ms. MacCallum, I think, correctly points out, well, we'll be further into the narrative at that point, and, will the parties be able to ask questions and come back to in the timeline and ask questions about earlier documents, or would they be confined to the sort of four corners of whatever document gets produced about the command decision narrative? So a fair question, and it really brings into play the sort of narrative flow of all this. If you start jumping all over the place, it can be difficult for some to follow, members of the public at least. So we'll watch for that when things continue. Now, Chief Justice MacDonald noted that they would be trying to get the decisions on witnesses done very quickly, as soon as possible. He said, I kind of doubt that will be Wednesday when the commission hearings resume. The plan for Wednesday now is for Commission Counsel Roger Burrell, who we've seen present the foundational documents already, present a foundational document about the overnight hours where the perpetrator spent some time in Debert and traveling around that area of the county. And then after that, which is expected to be a short presentation, sounds like maybe an hour or two, then the parties will have an opportunity to stand up and say, well, here are some of the gaps we've identified in that presentation, or other witnesses that should be brought in to add to it in some manner. So we'll hear of all of that on Wednesday, and I'll be here to report on it afterwards. And you can follow me on Twitter during the day as well for some commentary and to get links to all of the videos and blog pieces that I post at Adam Rogers NS. All right, so until Wednesday, that's the analysis for today, day 7 of the Mass Casualty Commission hearings. A brief day dealing with whether police officers should testify, and if so, when. So that's all for now, and so we'll see you next time.